In this part of the lab, we are going to delineate the watershed using on-screen digitizing and compare that watershed with the ArcGIS derived watershed for the specified drainage. For the watershed that we're going to delineate, we're going to use as the outlet this location in this drainage that drains into Emerald Canyon. This is the delineation MXD provided for you in the lab folder, and this is the extent that was used to produce the PDF that I gave you for the previous step in the lab. If you did that, you printed out a PDF of this quadrangle and went through the process of delineating the watershed using a pencil. And we're moving on to this step in the lab where we're going to use the on-screen digitizing tools. So the key is also to be not in layout view down here, but in map view. So I'm going to switch to map view. And then I'm going to zoom into my watershed because it's very difficult to delineate when you're so zoomed out. So I'm going to zoom into this location and I'm going to make it at a scale. I'm just going to type in here 1 to 10,000. So I'm going to zoom in at 1 to 10,000 so I can better see this drainage that I want to delineate. And again, we're going to delineate for this outlet. I've given you the outlet for the 3-meter DEM, which is this pour point that I've provided for you for the next step in the lab, but we're going to delineate the watershed for that area that drains to this particular stream network. This one little stream, we're going to delineate its watershed, so the watershed divide. So as you recall, V's pointing upward, or you acclimate your eye to the contour map, and V's pointing upward indicate the stream bed, and U's pointing downward indicate that ridge line or that watershed divide. It's this watershed divide that is what we're going to identify. It's that location that separates two basins. So if a drop of water is to fall right here, is it going to go into this stream network or this stream network? And that's what this ridge line or allows us to do. So allows us to identify. So we're going to go to our drawing tools. If you haven't activated them, if you right click on your menu bar and select the draw tools, they pop up. And we're going to select the polygon tool. And if you did this by hand, I had you connect the dots or draw dots that indicated that watershed divide. Here we don't have that luxury, and we're just going to have to use the polygon itself to identify those vertices, which is when every time you click your mouse, you create a vertice or vertex. So we are going to start at this outlet, and I'm going to just use my eye to and my mouse to connect the dots. And I'm clicking along what I think is the ridge line as best as possible. So I'm going to use the vertices. And then when you get to this point right here, you see if you ever have a benchmark, this is 703 indicates a benchmark. So I'm going to click on that X to make sure that that's included. A benchmark means that it's a measured point on your map and it's the highest point in the map. So I'm clicking merrily along and I'm coming around this point up here. And here it's a little tricky to see where the watershed divide is because it looks like there's a lot going on and there's some complexity here. But I'm going to come around here to this ridge line here, which is a path, because that indicates that there's a path. And it looks like that path is probably where people walk along the crest of this area. So I'm going to come across, here's another watershed divide, and I'm going to come across this way, and I'm going to come through here, and I'm going to click along this benchmark here, and I'm going to come back down around and click down here, click through these U's here, and this seems to me to be a good indication of the watershed. When I double click, it saves it as a polygon, and now we want to convert this polygon to a graphic and save it as a shapefile. So I'm going to go to my drawing tools and go to convert graphics to features, and I'm going to save it into the folder for our lab with a meaningful name and a meaningful location. So I'm going to save it into watersheds in the output folder, and instead of converted graphic, I'm going to call it hand drawn shed. And add that to my MXD, and it assigns it the symbology of the graphic. So once we know it's a shapefile, you can highlight that and just hit the delete. When it's highlighted, you see that it's got these dots, that the graphic is selected. I'm going to hit that and delete it. It looks like it hasn't been deleted, but that's just because it took the symbology of the graphic. And I'm going to select properties and change my symbology just to confirm. Just save it as a different, I guess I'll just pick that color. Okay, and apply. And now we have our watershed. And before I finish, I'm going to go into its attribute table. And I'm going to add two fields. I'm going to add a field called km squared because I want to calculate its area and make that a float. And I'm going to add another field, and this time I'm going to make this field text, and I'm going to call it a label because I want to make sure that I know that this came from the hand-drawn watershed. So in the kilometer squared field, I'm going to go to calculate geometry, and I'm going to calculate geometry into square kilometers, and it's 0.55 or so square kilometers. And in label, I'm going to calculate, I'm sorry, whoops, I did the wrong thing. I'm going to go to field calculator, and I'm just going to type in for label in quotes, hand-drawn watershed, or something to that effect. And now we have our hand-drawn watershed. Voila. Okay, so I'm going to end the video here and we'll move on to the next step.